Good morning. So reading my Bible today, I got something so powerful. I got to put it down. Sometimes we get so intimidated by what we see, and we forget what we're fighting, who we're fighting, how we're fighting, and all of that. So I was looking at Samuel, 1 Samuel 17, and I was immediately taken to verse 3. And the Philistines stood on a mountain on one side, and Israel stood on the mountain on the other, and there was a valley between them. And all of a sudden I'm like, they weren't right next to each other. They had space, and there was territory that needed to be taken over in order to get to the enemy. And both sides were going to have to fight. There was no ifs, ands, or buts about it. Who was going to make the first move? So I was thinking about sometimes we need to fight. There's no other way around it. We can stand and God will fight for us, yes, but sometimes we're going to have to do the battle. And what the Philistines did was they intimidated the tar out of them. They spent all their money, all their effort, and they put on a big show for good reason. Goliath was the best of the best, and he was intimidating. He was their best warrior. He was very cocky, confident, arrogant, and he was very disrespectful to their God and to everything about them. And so he played a mind game on them. And he's like, whenever you come over here, we're done, because I'm going to take you out. And they knew, just by looking at him, that he could back up his threat. And so what happened was they were scared. They forgot everything that they knew, and they went with what was in front of them. And I think the big thing is they watched the whole production happen, from the setting up of the army to the big display of, look at all the stuff we have, and they're watching all this. And as they're watching it, they're getting more and more intimidated. Whoa, this is a big deal. They're really making a big deal about this. And as they got more and more consumed in the situation, they forgot about the Red Sea. They forgot about Pharaoh, the plagues, the 10 Commandments, and all the battles that they had already won, where they never should have been able to fight and have victory, ever. But they just became consumed with what they saw in front of them, and they lost their faith. And it's a really good thing that David wasn't included with them. David was still discarded and disregarded and just taking care of sheep at home because he wasn't worth it, even though he would have been able to fight. So dad says, hey, go give them some food. And so he goes to his brothers, and his brothers are mocking him and humiliating him and trying to figure out what's going on. He's like, dude, I'm just here because dad told me to come. And he just looks at the situation with fresh eyes, with eyes filled with faith. And that changes everything. He wasn't intimidated. He wasn't afraid. He saw Goliath and everything they had, but they couldn't do the mind game on him because he hadn't watched all their production, all their show, and all their theatrical displays of power and pomp and circumstance. He just came in and he had God. And he's like, what is this? Don't you guys see it? And they were all afraid because they had been together encouraging one another in their fears. And they were able to take that fear and continue to be more intimidated by the whole thing. We got to be really careful what we allow to come out of our mouths and what we allow ourselves to see, because there's big displays of power and strength and might, and we need to be really careful about whether we allow ourselves to be intimidated by that, because they forgot all the victories, all the battles they had won with God on their side. And so they encouraged one another and stayed afraid and immobile. And David was not part of the crowd, and this was a great thing. He wasn't able to be surrounded by all the negativity and have peer pressure pull him down. So by him not being accepted, not being one of the group, he actually saves their life. Never thought being ostracized would be a good thing, but it is here. He was able to assess the situation through eyes of faith in a God who would what? Deliver, conquer, save, whatever they needed. He saw it just with eyes of faith. When they had their eyes of faith, it's like they took their glasses off and they couldn't see properly. Everyone else watched how they marched up the hill, made a big presentation about Goliath, and used all of these things to intimidate the Israelites into being afraid of what was in front of them. David missed all the pomp and circumstance. He came in with fresh, faith-filled eyes. All he saw was that his God was being mocked and ridiculed. Sometimes you need to take a step back and look at the situation. What is really going on? What is ultimately the battle? With these fresh eyes, he was able to make an assessment of the spiritual war going on. They forgot all about God, and all they saw was their little itty bitty selves and their little itty bitty army compared to Goliath and all that he has. And that is such a dangerous thing that anyone can do. Take our eyes on the enemy and put them, and that's all we focus on. We're going to lose that battle most of the time. I'm 5'2". I don't like pain. I'm going to be punished. I'm going to be beat. And I tell my students, they're 12 and 13, if you wanted to, you could take me right now, because I won't be able to beat you in a fight. And I don't want to fight you. So if it's a physical fight, I will lose every time. I'm not made like that. And so there's actually some confidence in recognizing that if it comes down to that, I'm not going to be able to make it. And so I have to look at the situation in a different way. I can't look at it as a physical fight because I recognize my own limitations. On my own, I'm not going to be conquering anything by my physical strength. Okay. And he wasn't looking at it as who was bigger and who was stronger. They would easily lose physically because Israel was much smaller, but that had never been an issue before because God was behind them, beside them, and in front of them. Are you sizing yourself up physically? Might versus might, height versus height, army versus army. When did this ever become a physical flesh fight? I think about my own battles right now. And if I look at my own strength versus other strength, okay, there's nothing to me. It's not going to be by my power. But I need to think back on who's on my side and who has always been able to fight and conquer in the past. And I need to put faith-filled eyes on the situation like David did. He came in, he wasn't intimidated. He wasn't in awe of what he saw. He's like, what is this? And they were all like, no, don't do anything. Because they had all been, they had all forgotten about all the victories. And they just saw what was in front of them. And we need to be really, really careful that every single battle we come to, that we look at it through the binocular of faith, through the lens of faith. We need to make sure our faith glasses are on, because without, I can't see anything correctly. I just see it blurry. When I put on my glasses, the details start to come in, and I need to be very careful that I look at each situation through the right sort of lenses.